Welcome everyone to our Wednesday webinar for Reverse the Red Day week. We are so excited that you are here for a look back at what Reverse the Red did in 2025 and a little bit of a look ahead and a preview for 2026. We're joined today by a few members of the executive committee, and I wanted to also note our thanks to the executive committee. We're co-chaired by the IUCN Species Survival Commission and World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And without this broad network, we would not be able to get everything done that you'll hear about throughout the rest of the webinar. So thank you to all of them for joining us, as well as for all of you for being interested in hearing about our goings on. We also wanted to thank our annual sponsors who really make our webinar series and a lot of the work that we do possible. So a quick thanks to them as well. And as we get started, I will play a short video for you that just introduces Reverse the Red and gets you excited about the upcoming Reverse the Red Day on February 7th.
In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Well, I hope you're all feeling hopeful and optimistic about the future for species conservation. Before I turn it over to our strategy director, Mike Clifford, to guide us through the rest of the conversation, just one or two housekeeping notes. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to know who you are and where you're joining us from. You also have the ability, if you would like, to show captions or translations at the bottom of your Zoom. So you can set those yourself. And then as we go through, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom, and we will answer those questions as we go. So without further ado, Mike, please take it away.
Fantastic. Well, it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourself in the world. We are stoked to be able to be here and share a little bit about some of the great things that happened in 2025 and look ahead to 2026. And I think it's always important to start with this optimistic reality that we do know how to recover species. If you've been able to join us earlier in this week, we've had incredible stories of progress and success for species recovery. We've talked about fungi, we've talked about plants, we've talked about animals, we've talked about innovations and eDNA, and we've talked about good recovery strategies and collaborations. All of that makes it possible to actually succeed, and to see biodiversity recovered, particularly to see species recovered, that we can reverse these negative trends. So we do know it's possible. Now, the question and the challenge in front of us, and this is why I'm so thankful to be here with you all on this panel, is that how do we do this at the pace and the scale needed? That's really the question. And so before we get too far, we'll do some intros here. And what I'd like to say is that each one of these individuals are incredible. I feel deeply honored to get to work with each one of them on a weekly and monthly basis. They bring such wide expertise and passion, curiosity, creativity, and it's teams like this. There's more that represent the Reverse the Red Coalition, but these four are an absolute gem, and I'm really thankful to be a part of this community with them. So with that, I'd love to have each of you introduce yourselves. And if when you introduce yourself, you can also share one thing that happened in 2025 that has brought you hope around all of this work. And so we'll go Carly, Lois, Fiona, Sam. But Carly, if you'd like to start off and introduce yourself. Welcome.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Megan. I'm Dr. Carly Cowell. I'm the Director of Conservation Policy and Practice at Botanic Gardens Conservation International. Excuse me. So we are a Botanic Gardens group, but actually that does not sum up exactly what we do. We are the world's biggest plant conservation network. And in so doing, what gave me hope in 2025, at the end of the year, we collate all our actions that we do to save plant species from extinction. And it really gave me hope to see that BGCI and its partners collectively took action on over 500 individual plant species that are threatened, to aid their recovery, and in some cases reverse that and take them down off the status of the red list. So thanks, Mike.
Amazing. Okay, we'll go to Lois.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you. My name is Lois Lelanchon. I'm Head of Partnerships and Advocacy at World Association of Zoos and Aquarium, WAZA. And I'm here to represent the global zoo and aquarium community. We are co-founding partner of Reverse the Red, and very happy to be on the executive committee as well. And so I want to thank overall the global zoo and aquarium community, because WAZA members are extremely involved, not only in Reverse the Red, but also in conservation, and committed to species recovery. So, and in terms of what really gave me hope in 2025, I'd say seeing all of the conservation partners at the IUCN World Conservation Congress was a momentum. And I think the momentum was on multilateralism. And that was very important in this current context, to focus on working together across the globe so that we can achieve biodiversity targets and overall have global biodiversity recovery. Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Fiona.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Fiona Sach. I work at the Zoological Society of London, London and Whipsnade Zoo, and I'm Conservation Impact Manager there. At ZSL, we provide care for 21 extinct in the wild species, and I'm the co-chair of the IUCN SSC Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. So in terms of what brings me hope, I have brought a little prop, so I hope you can see it on the video. You can see here this very small little fluffy snail. Strictly, this happened in 2023, but I'm going to discuss how this actually moves forward into 2025. So this is a Parchla tahiviana, and this was downlisted on the IUCN Red List from extinct in the wild to critically endangered. And this gives me amazing hope because it shows what is possible. And we've all heard extensively about the downlisting of the Scimitar oryx, which is a huge thing to celebrate. But also we should be celebrating these smaller creatures, which have had huge success. Now, there are 13 other extinct in the wild partridge snails within the Partridge Consortium, and there are over 6,000 endemic oceanic snails in need of desperate help and support. And so the last 4 decades of work on this little snail has huge capacity to be translated to supporting these other 6,000 endemic oceanic snails that need help and that are cascading into total extinction and being lost from the world forever. So that brings me huge hope that we have managed to succeed with this little guy. And so lots of optimism for the future.
It's awesome. Thank you. And thank you for the prop. That's wonderful.
Sale if anyone would like to buy them.
Okay. And last but not least, Sam.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so my name is Sam Ivande. I'm the National Species Conservation Coordinator at the Global Center for Species Survival. That's based here at the Indianapolis Zoo. The Global Center, it's a partnership between the Indianapolis Zoo and the Species Survival Commission of the IUCN. And through that partnership, I get to work with a lot of the national species specialist groups, providing coordination and support for those groups to advance a lot of the SSC's conservation agenda, especially at the national level. And then in terms of maybe what brings me hope, so just I think in 2025 was another cycle for the Indianapolis Prize, and that is the event where we get to celebrate conservation heroes. And I think it was really inspiring to hear some of those stories, the commitments, the dedication that people put behind all of the work, in spite of the challenges that species continue to face. There are lots of people out there who are dedicating their time, sacrificing a lot to make sure that there's a lot of improvement with some of the species. So seeing those stories, it was really inspiring, continues to inspire me with hope, particularly when you hear about species that are on the brink and all of the actions that people have put in place, to ensure that populations are recovering and all of that. I think it was really good to see those people celebrated through those events. So yeah, it's always good to know that there are conservation heroes out there, and yeah, that gives me hope.
Fantastic. And I love it. I don't think there's a better way to start than to think about hope. There's a great quote that talks about hope is the thing that enables us to endure, and particularly to endure through difficult work. And the reality is that the work that we all do is quite difficult. We wouldn't be working on recovering species if they weren't in trouble, if they weren't having an issue, if there wasn't some problem. And we do have to own that reality that we're working against the flow and the current often for many of these species, but it's that hope and the reality that it's actually working in so many of these places. And Carly, like you were saying, to see the mass of all of these actions and commitments all together and to celebrate that is critical. And it's essential for us to maintain that hope and to maintain that endurance and the ability to continue to act and show up each and every day. So it's a wonderful way to start. And I think with that, and Lois, you actually mentioned this, but one of the big things that happened in 2025 was the IUCN World Conservation Congress. And for anyone who wasn't able to attend or didn't know about it, it's over 10,000 conservationists from probably every country on the planet, I think, was represented or very close to it. There were tons and tons of events. There were side events. There were convenings. There were meetings. There were motions that were debated and voted on. It was the first one I've been to, and it was incredible. I was so thankful to be there. And we were very fortunate to have a Reverse the Red pavilion. So that space was dedicated for really 5 days of it to celebrate hope and action, to talk about critical elements to grow and scale this work. But I'd love to start, and Lois, I'll throw it to you first, is just out of all of the Conservation Congress, so not just the Reverse the Red pavilion, but what were some of the conversations that you found most interesting at the event?
I think there were some really important discussions about science versus policy, and hopefully policy serving science, and vice versa. And I think those conversations were important because it's always trying to link, field actions to broader systemic level change. and vice versa as well. So I think those conversations, and it can apply to anything. It can apply to species recovery, it can apply to habitat protection. But I think having those exchanges between conservation practitioners and policy decision makers is very important, because that is what gives us coherence when we're developing tools and policies and frameworks for conservation in general and for biodiversity protection. So those were probably the most interesting conversations that I've heard at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. Fantastic.
Fiona, so unmuted there.
So to kind of go into the nitty-gritty, Lewis has kind of given us a great broad start. I found some of the conversations and linking between the motions that were going on and being voted on and the discussions that we were having as a community around cryopreservation and biobanking to be the most interesting, because really everyone has got something valuable to contribute to this discussion and everybody is right in some ways. And I think it really made me reflect that there would have been a time some years ago these conversations would have never happened, and activities and actions, probably wrongly so, or absolutely wrongly so, would have been conducted without that same level of thought and that same level of concern. And actually, although there may be disagreements in opinion and there might be differences and different thoughts, all of those are coming from a place of far increased knowledge and far increased thought than we would have had, say, 20 years ago in this conservation space. And that's something to be hugely commended upon. And those differences should be celebrated, because there was a time when those conversations would never have happened. The locations of such biobanks, the communities and the people involved, that those conversations would never have taken place, and a far more colonial and appropriately colonial lens would have been applied.
Yeah, great point. Carly, we send it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I think to pull it out a bit from Fiona going quite specific, I had really, good conversations and part of conversations about data transparency, how we need to be sharing our data and our lessons learned a lot more. But like Fiona just said, we wouldn't have been having those conversations 20 years ago. It was much more open and shared, and particularly conversations focusing around interoperability between databases and data sets, so that we're not duplicating things and collecting the same information someone else has. And we can actually speed up species recovery. And you said earlier, Mike, it is a slow process, but we're seeing things speeding up. And I think the conversations around sharing data, sharing lessons learned is definitely going to help. And it's driving this force. And yeah, I found those conversations really inspiring. And taking them forward, we're doing that across the global Botanic Garden community as well.
That's fantastic. I love it. Okay, Sam?
Yeah, it was. So first of all, it was also a first for me. That was my first time being at the Congress. And besides the sheer size, like of people that were there, that's the first time I had been at a conference, that big. And then maybe just echoing what some of the others have already have pointed out. I thought it was also really interesting to see the multi-sectoral participation that was happening there. So lots of people, I could see exhibitions from business, from finance. There were national governments also present there. There were lots of exhibitions, practitioners, civil society. So it was for me, it was one of those moments where you sit back and you think, oh wow, there's so many people, and everyone bringing different perspectives, different skills, and basically everybody recognizing that I think all hands needs to be on deck, for us to be able to address these challenges. And I could hear all of that from all of the conversations, or at least for some of the events that I attended. There was all of that conversation about, oh well, we need to avoid having those siloed approaches, and like, let's break down the silos. We need to work together. And just like Ali also mentioned, lots of conversations about, oh, how do we share and manage all of the knowledge that we collectively have together. So those were really interesting conversations to have, and I think I'm really glad that I was able to participate in something like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think building off what all of you are saying and segueing into the next question about trends moving forward, I think you're all spot on in that we need to have this increased transparency and ability to communicate, but for the purpose of alignment and coherence of our strategies, both at the policy level, the practice level. And one thing that I would say is we've never had more access to technology and assets in this way than ever in history. We have more today and we'll have more tomorrow. But one thing I think that's a critical trend is the conservation field doesn't tend to lead with developing technologies that advance our goals. It seems like we kind of use technology that's been created, but we're often left still disconnected or siloed. And Carly, you were mentioning it. How I think a trend we have to wrestle with into next year is how do we actually leverage technology for the sake of increasing the pace, for the sake of delivering on impact versus, just using a system because it's there, or creating a new one because of something. So I think that's a trend that I picked up on, but would love to maybe go in the same order and just see, are there any trends that you think will be really critical and relevant moving into 2026? Maybe that you picked up on at the Congress, but trends moving forward. So Lois, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, I think one of the motion actually focused on AI, the use of AI for conservation, and I think that's one that we need to consider in the future, because this is one that has incredible benefits, that can generate incredible benefits for conservation, and specifically for conservation education. I can think of on top of my head, but I'm not a scientist, so there are probably many other ways. But I think with that also comes the caveat of having to deal with AI in the future, and what could be also the disadvantage or the negative impacts of that. So I think that's one of the trends that we need to really look at and look for in the future is about really the benefits and potentially the harmful aspects of AI in the future. But that presents a really incredible and powerful tool.
Absolutely. Great point. Fiona, trends from your perspective.
I think what was really apparent to me at WCC was how zoos and WASA zoos were really able to show their representation, and that kind of real movement and one plan approach, moving from in situ to ex situ conservation, with ex situ conservation being a tool used within all conservation. And I think the position statement from SSC at the role of zoos and the role of ex situ facilities and botanical gardens has really helped to push that forward. And hearing that narrative repeated more and more often throughout multiple discussions, and really the recognition of the role that some of these ex situ facilities are able to play to support really good on the ground conservation was really a common thread and something to be excited about.
Love it. Great.
What Fiona said.
Very good. Carly.
Yeah, I think one of the trends that I picked up was the positivity of finance towards species recovery, but going into long-term monitoring. Conservation has often been the discussion that conservation projects are funded. It's the action on the ground, it's the planting of the trees, it's the release of species into the wild after they haven't been in a certain habitat, and the funding ends. How does that species do? How does it recover? What's the next generation doing, or the generation after that? And the finance mechanisms and the funding bodies were talking about, well, we need this data, we need the impact, and we need to fund the long-term monitoring to know what the species are doing, what are the habitats doing, recovering. And I think that was a big trend that, the conversation started small, and there was lots of different talks and pavilions I was running between trying to get to all of them. But overall, I was seeing this afterwards, after the Congress itself, now a couple of months later, it's still there. It's still driving. We still have finance mechanisms going, how do we do this? And they're looking to the conservation practitioners and the scientists to say, this is what we need for long-term recovery. If we want to take things off of the red list, if we want to reverse extinct in the wild, they need to have this many generations. We need to monitor that they're doing that. and that's it's coming through. And I'm really chuffed about it because it's what we've been talking for so long that we need, and there it is. It's happening.
That's very cool. And I love that alignment, like what Lois was saying earlier, that coherence between policy, financing, science, all starting to congeal is great. Sam, from your view, what are those trends we need to be thinking about?
Well, I'll say what everyone else said, but also, yeah, but also, so it was also really interesting to see, so all of the different sectors and all of the groups represented and organizations, but then there was also something that I picked up from the conversations about everyone trying to reevaluate how they're thinking about impact. So the impact that organizations, governments, everyone, like everybody is rethinking about how, how do we think about impact? What really is our impact? And so, there was a lot of that in lots of the conversations that happened. And I think that's what I would say is also a positive trend beyond just looking at, oh yeah, what have we as an organization done versus, what do we contribute to the whole? Because this is actually something like we have all been talking about. This is something that requires all hands on deck. And so if we begin to rethink, like what impact really means, what portion of it do we contribute, but then also what is the collective impact that we have? So I thought I was hearing that from some of the conversations and some of the sessions that I participated in.
It's fantastic. And I think building off of that, that idea of impact is something that's really close to the heart of Reverse the Red. And always pushing ourselves as a conservation community to say, what is the measurable impact? What's the change we're trying to have for these species? And I mentioned we had the Reverse the Red Pavilion at the Conservation Congress. And if you happen to be there, we were fortunate enough that there was beautiful art of all 44 finalists of the Accelerator Award. And really the reason the Accelerator Award was created was to do exactly what you're saying, Sam, was how do we aim for measurable recovery and try to move faster and try to put in innovation and this collaboration to the press announcement of all the winners. But one of the other things that Accelerator Award did was bring focus to species that are often not paid attention to and not always thought of as the big charismatic thing that, we all hear on the news and things like that. And there's been another really critical initiative that got launched. And Carly, I'd love for you to share a little bit more. But at the WCC, you launched the Illegal Plant Trade Coalition. And I feel like that's one of the brilliant things out of it is bringing attention to something that's super urgent, critical, making a huge difference, and often isn't paid attention to or thought of as much as so many other things. So I would love for you to share a little bit about this initiative.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so the Illegal Plant Trade Coalition, it's a consortium of conservation organizations, zoos, botanic gardens, the horticulture industry, in situ conservation practitioners, all coming together to combat the illegal trade of ornamental plants. Now, that's not something that reaches the headlines of any newspapers or television shows or anything like that, but it's a real threat to plant species in the wild. They are going extinct due to overharvesting, illegal harvesting, and trade, mainly trade online. The internet, we were saying technology is fantastic. There's some downsides to it too. And the coalition, really aims to raise awareness of this threat to plant species, and not to share the messaging of don't buy plant species. Of course not. We want people to have plants, be surrounded by greenery and nature. And our tagline is think twice, trade right. And we're really promoting the recovery of species in the wild, restoring those species to their habitat, but also the ethical and sustainable production of them, and then the sales of them. So you can still have them as a house plant or a garden plant, knowing that their wild populations are safe and sound and continuing what they need to be doing out there in the wild for biodiversity for the planet. And the coalition really, it's got many facets because there's awareness, there's research that we still need to know, there's on-the-ground conservation action, working with local communities and capacity building to grow those species, and then put them onto market so we can all enjoy them in our homes. And I really think, and launching it in Abu Dhabi at the Congress was fantastic. We were amongst our peers, but as Samuel says, there were so many other sectors there, from business to finance, research, the press, everybody. And it really, they cottoned onto this, and we've just had so much engagement afterwards, and the positivity coming out going, yeah, it happens at home. And we're getting stories and support, and we really are recovering species now.
Fantastic. So as this has gotten traction, and I've watched it too, just the build and groups coming forth that are interested, that maybe wasn't expected. I'm curious, from your view, what has been the most surprising positive thing that's been generated since launching the Illegal Plant Trade Coalition?
I think the most surprising thing is public sector engagement, is our socials. They went through the roof. We were doing social media posts and engagement prior to the launch, and then it has gone through the roof. And the contact we've had afterwards, just people signing up on the BGCI website. We've got a sign up sheet. Just become a supporter, a voice for those illegally traded plants. And it's there. Society are stepping forward and going, this isn't right. And I enjoy my house plants, and I want whatever's happening in the wild to be natural and not to have species going extinct. So I think that has been, the most amazing thing, is just the overwhelming support.
That's fantastic. And I love that too, because it's, in the spectrum of conservation, I think there's always this narrative that, like, well, people only care about these ones and not these. So to hear people saying, no, that plant should be safe in the wild, and that, that the regular individual deeply cares, I think that's very encouraging and hopeful on that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. So we may come back to a little bit more on that, but again, thinking of these action partnerships, these specific efforts, you mentioned this earlier, but would love for you to share a little bit more about the Extinct in the Wild partnership. What is it? What are we trying to do with it? And kind of how has it developed into this year, and what you're looking forward to for 2026 with it?
Thank you. So we're really excited about 2026. The end of 2025 saw the sort of formal launch of the new IUCN SSC Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. So we are the second action partnership under the SSC. And really, the role of the action partnership is working for these species which are at the very, very pointy edge of extinction. These are the species which are clinging on perilously to survival in ex situ care, so in our zoos and our aquariums and our botanical gardens. And our ex situ care providers have done an amazing job in looking after these species, often for many, many decades, but none of them are safe. They're all facing a very perilous future, and they all require support to return them back to safe wild habitat. And this is a very unique and a very sort of peculiar end of the red list, if you like, where these species are really, really, really about to be lost entirely from the world. They are lost from nature, and zoos and aquariums and botanical gardens have a real opportunity to live their mission and to be real contributors to conservation, and to move from that historic lens where we have been in the past 100 years ago as consumers of conservation, to be real contributors as we move forward, as we approach 2030. So in the next year, we're really excited about more organisations joining the partnership. There's lots of opportunities for different organisations to join the partnership at different levels. We're looking for people to think, or ex situ facilities to think very carefully about their facilities and the resources that they have, and if there's any way they can look at their species planning to provide husbandry and care towards some of these species. Most of these species all require more holders, and so there's a real opportunity for that. And that's really thinking not just holding single individuals, but really thinking about how you can hold, potentially a couple of individuals to contribute to providing these animals or plants for potential release into safe wild habitat, to think about how you could share your skills and your resources, and how you can contribute to the partnership technically or financially. There's a huge number of different ways to get involved, and we're very welcoming to everybody at every level at this point. So please do consider this within your organisations. And as I say, we're very excited about the upcoming year and bringing more people into the partnership.
It's fantastic. And one of the things I really love about the Extinct in the Wild partnership within Reverse the Red, it's in our name, is we're trying to reverse the trends of the red list. And on paper, moving from extinct in the wild to critically endangered is probably the easiest to understand as far as, it's straightforward. If they're no longer in the wild and they become in the wild, that's positive. And that sounds really easy, but that's not easy. And it's quite complicated. And you've got some success stories under your belt, which is great. But we'd love to hear from you. Can you just unpack a little bit of what are some of the most difficult barriers to actually achieving the impact? Like Sam was talking about earlier, that's the impact we're after. But what are the biggest barriers to really seeing that come to fruition?
So I think there's really kind of two issues here to unpack. So first of all, we have these species which are probably critically endangered, cascading into potentially total extinction without ever being represented in ex situ care. And there's a huge issue there, and they potentially require ex situ support, those species, which requires money, permitting, government support, institutions to be available and ready to do this work. So that requires a whole special suite of skills. And then we look at species which are in ex situ care, these which are extinct in the wild and are potentially returning back to safe wild habitat. And again, they require considerable conservation planning. There needs to be enough physical individuals to not harm the ex situ population sustainability. So there needs to be very careful demographic and genetic work done to make sure that we have the individuals available. We need zoos and botanical gardens to be breeding those animals and plants so that there are potential candidate animals and plants available. We do need considerable funding. Again, many of these species are smaller and their costs are lower than sort of larger charismatic mammals, but nevertheless, it is still very costly. There needs to be science work done. There needs to be research. We need to consider the genetics. We need to consider if and how samples should be preserved for future. There needs to be safe wild habitat available, appropriate survey work conducted, all in line with IUCN best practice. So a huge amount needs to happen. And then once those animals have been released, and we've got a lovely success story with the CHEC that we're celebrating at the moment, and these animals have been released by an assisted colonization, so they've not gone back to Guam, but they've gone to an ecologically similar island of Palmyra Atoll. And there are 9 birds flying free in Palmyra for the first time in 40 years, which is fantastic. But they do require intensive and long-term post-release monitoring. And it's not sorted for them. They still require investment, monitoring, protection. And then ultimately on their journey back to Guam, there needs to be a lot of threat reduction that takes place, more habitat assessment and making habitat suitable. So please don't be put off. There's lots to be positive about, but the actual steps in the process are quite extensive, and it is quite time consuming, and there are costs involved.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I mean, and all of that, what I hear is the good news in there is that there is knowledge of how to do it. There's processes, there's examples. Yes, it's complicated, but it's possible. And speaking of complicated, to shift gears a little bit, Lois, so when I think of complicated, I'm not sure there's a better example than the alphabet soup that is CBD, NGOs, GBF, GSPC, non-state, state, TSC. I mean, throw them all in there. I think one of the biggest challenges is when we think about this alignment, and you were talking about at the beginning, this coherence and alignment of all these elements. How do we start to just understand some of the critical facets and who's who and how do they relate to each other?
I'll try to make it very simple. So I would say the basis we have is the CBD, so the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it's a treaty that is ratified by 196 parties, governments. And within this, we have the Conference of the Parties, which is the decision-making body of that convention. And so what I think we need to really focus on is that we have a framework. Right now we have the Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, another acronym, which was adopted in 2022. And that is essentially our roadmap to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. So we have 4 goals, 23 targets, and the ones that we're discussing here today is target 4, to halt extinction, species extinction, protect genetic diversity, and manage human-wildlife conflicts. And so governments are responsible for implementing the GBF, the framework. nationally, and that goes through their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which we call NBSAPs, another acronym that you have here. And we have non-state actors, and those are NGOs, indigenous peoples and local communities, the private sectors, cities, and institutions like zoos and aquariums. So we are not decision makers, but I feel we have the responsibility to share our expertise for shaping those policies. And this is what I was referring to earlier. But most importantly, we are critical delivery partners. So we will help national governments in delivering on their commitments. And so the CBD now recognizes more and more voluntary commitments from state actors, partnerships, and also implementation mechanisms. So this is where organizations like the Reverse the Red Partners and WASA can directly contribute. So I hope this was clear, but in short, this is governments set the direction, but the delivery happens and needs to happen with non-state actors. So this is why it's very important that we're here today for Reverse the Red Day, because we are fully mobilized and we need to be also aligned with the targets of the GBF.
Yeah, fantastic. That was so good. I feel like we just need like an infographic with your words on it right there that we can just pump out. That was spot on. And you mentioned why it's important. I mean, I think that alignment. So maybe, just a follow-up question to that is, so if somebody's in a non-state actor role, what's really the first step, or how would you recommend starting to deepen their awareness and understanding of this relationship and this alignment? What's kind of the first thing that you would say they should think about doing?
I think for non-state actors, they first need to think of what they can bring to the table, what they're doing, what is their strength, what is their expertise, their knowledge, and then go through, Reverse the Red and actually put that expertise available for the national governments, so that when we're developing, for instance, species NBSAPs, we can recognize, for instance, the link between ex situ and in situ, that Fiona, all of that expertise that Fiona has mentioned just before I took that question, was all of that. You know what you can do, what you're good at doing, then go through Reverse the Red and go through your government so that you can make it available for them to deliver on their commitments.
It's fantastic. Great advice. I love that self-reflection. And I think, Carly, this is something that BGCI has been doing for a bit with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. But would you maybe add a word about how are you collecting that? What Lois is talking about, the skills, the assets, the abilities.
Yeah. So the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, GSPC, to add another acronym into the soup, as you called it, it's a mechanism. It's within the CBD, and it came about in about 2002. Many years ago, that the Botanic Garden and global plant conservation community came together and said, we need to do something for plant species. And in line with the CBD targets, we have parallel plant targets. So they're called the actions, the GSPC actions. And it's a checklist. It just tells you what you can do to contribute all the way through to the CBD targets and the goals, and implement them. And what we're doing at the moment, we have a group called the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation, and that was set up to deliver the GSPC way back in 2000 and odd. And we are actually working on a reporting mechanism for the non-state actors, as Lois has said, because you can report in and work with your governments on the NBSAPs, and guide them and help with delivery. But there are some areas where the work that's being done by NGOs and local communities won't be reported into the CBD through the government reporting mechanisms. And so we are working on a reporting and monitoring mechanism to show the impact of all of us doing species conservation, biodiversity conservation. And we're trying to make it as simple as possible, because we know we actually want people out there on the ground working on species recovery rather than sitting writing more reports.
Yeah.
So That's what we're doing at the moment, Mike. Watch the space.
That's fantastic. And I think that even lends to one of the big things that Reverse the Red is doing in 2026. And again, it's fantastic with BGCI and WASA and IUCN SSC, all as critical partners of Reverse the Red. We're all working to align and link that. So like was said earlier, not duplicate the efforts, but be complementary. And one of the things that we learned quite early on a few years ago was that there's tons of species conservation happening. It's just that we're often unaware of who's doing it, where, and then that alignment, like you were saying, to the state actors who do report on these things, they're often unaware of the actions that are happening even in their own country. And so that was why we created and launched the Reverse the Red Species Pledge. And the intent there was it becomes a structure, very simple structure, where we can recognize who's working on what species in what countries. And like you were both saying, and Lois, I think your advice is so spot on, is start with what are your skills? What are your assets? How can you support? And in the pledge, it goes through, there's actually a list that's derived from the IUCN's Global Species Action Plan. So more acronyms for the soup. But it outlines all of the critical recovery focused actions needed to deliver on Target 4. And so we've been building that as a way to recognize those actions and both help the states to understand their progress towards Target 4, but also even these non-state actors. So for anybody who's watching and listening, that is a phenomenal way to make that species pledge, submit that action. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to make a pledge. And as we've talked about, we're working to link that with BGCI's action tracker and the GSPC. And again, to try to really demonstrate how much incredible work is actually happening and often has measurable impact. And then the other piece for us within Reverse the Red is providing that support at the national level. Because the way the structure, as Lois, you're explaining it, it is organized by state. So country by country are to report. And so we know that many countries, if you look at all 23 targets, it's an incredibly massive amount of work to do. And the governments themselves often don't have all of the staff or the expertise needed. So Reverse the Red as a coalition and through a lot of our structures are able to start providing specific support at the national level. And Sam, I think that's really why your role exists and why we're so thankful that you exist to fill that role. But I would love for you to share a little bit about kind of this national level coordination. And then for you specifically, obviously, a strong emphasis in Nigeria and the work that you're doing. So I would love for you to enlighten us on how does that work? Where do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, so I think Lois also did a very good job, explaining and bringing us to see all of the connections. But then, like you mentioned, a lot of that work is necessary and needs to happen at the national level. And so as part of the ways to make available, and just like Lois was saying, there's lots of expertise that people can make available and people can volunteer expertise. And so one of the ways to make available that expertise to national governments, and one of the ways that the SSC is looking to do that is through the National Species Specialist Groups. So essentially, these are groups of experts organizing at the national level. Usually, for some of the groups, they've started by looking at who is already a part of the SSC network and working at a national level, and they all get together and organize to make sure that that expertise is available to support national governments as well. But then we also have an opportunity through these platforms to then recognize and identify and bring in some more local experts who perhaps at the moment are not currently engaged at the global level, what's happening, but then there's a lot of expertise that they're able to bring in, at the national level. So the National Species Specialist Groups are a relatively new kind of structure that has been set up. Perhaps many of us will be familiar with the taxonomic specialist groups, that work at the taxonomic level, but these are groups of experts across multiple taxa working at the national level. So that's basically what the National Species Specialist Groups are. We are beginning to set up a good number of these groups. Currently, there are 12 of them. And we're looking to expand and continue to provide this platform for experts to work at different levels in their countries. also with the opportunity for those local experts to interact in a language that, they can all communicate with each other, especially in countries where English is not the primary language. So national species specialist groups allow, local experts to work together and interact, in languages that they can all understand and be able to support the national government. So that's the national species specialist groups. And to your point about, like some of my ongoing work, with the Reverse the Red strategy at the national level and providing support, especially through helping to identify what some of those priority species, those target 4 species might be. I think my most practical experience and involvement with that has been, working with the National Species Specialist Group in Nigeria, where we've had the opportunity to look at, what's currently on the IUCN Red List that we can find in the country, and then looking at, like the ranking from the protocol that Reverse the Red is currently working to develop and use to support national countries. We've looked at that list in Nigeria, for example, and we realize, oh, wow, okay, there's some effort, lots of efforts going on, but then there are lots of other species, as we can see with the target 4 species, where we need dedicated action for those species, and where lots of the attention has gone to other species, and we're overlooking some of those species where we could actually have an impact, but then we're currently not doing so. So I think that was really interesting for us, working through that process. As part of that process, we looked at like the rank list that was provided through the Reverse the Red protocol. We looked at that rank list, looked at it with what we currently have as priority species within the country's NBSAP, and we realized that there are gaps, like there are more species that we need to be paying attention to. And now the specialist group is working to engage a lot more with the government actors there to see, what do we need to be doing differently, and how can we begin to elevate these species to the level where they get the kind of attention that they need, especially because it's a species where actions in Nigeria will have a significant impact on the global populations. So these are some of the, we're already beginning to see, like all of that work and all of that synergy beginning to yield results where we can see that, we need to have everyone working together and pulling in the right direction.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, I think that's such a key part of how do we engage species recovery work at scale and at pace, is that alignment of how do we have the best science that informs policy and informs financing, but that it's aligned, there's collaboration around, and again, that's so much at the heart of this effort in Reverse the Red as a coalition. So I can't be more excited about the work that's going on. And I think, as we look ahead into 2026, Reverse the Red as a coalition, continuing to support these very specific initiatives like the Illegal Plant Trade Coalition, the Extinct the Wild Partnership, those focused efforts give a framework and give actions, things that we know we can do that matters, that there's impact that comes with it. So I think those things are amazing. Our commitment to continue to support countries with understanding target 4, which species fit into it, but also how do we mobilize this large network of non-state actors and partners like botanic gardens and zoos and aquariums and universities. We all have a role to play to achieve this. And so we're moving in that direction. And I think the other element of this too, and a commitment of Reverse the Red, is to continue to put forth stories of success and hope. And where's it working? How do we learn from what is working and where we get traction? And one of the things that's actually at the end of this week, February 7th, is officially Reverse the Red Day, but we're looking for any groups that are doing species recovery actions to share those stories, to share those positive stories. And when you do that, tag Reverse the Red, connect with us, collaborate with us. We want to amplify and share those stories all around the globe. The other thing that will be new is we are launching the public-facing web app of the Species Pledge. So you can go in and actually see what other commitments there are for species recovery. And one of the things, and I think, Sam, this is to your point, is you'll actually have the opportunity now to request collaborations with other individuals. We hear over and over that, there's 5 different groups working on hawksbills turtles, but they've never talked to each other or met. or there's 10 groups that are all working on cycads, all trying to solve a similar problem, but we could actually collaborate, meet, and try to tackle that problem more efficiently. Or Fiona, as you were saying, there may be a species that's critically endangered and heading in the wrong direction, and maybe this is the right time we can say, who are some of the ex situ partners that could step in now while these in situ partners are desperately trying to kind of hold the line? We need those collaborations, and that's where we need to head. So we have a little bit of time left. There was a question that came through the chat that I think is a really good one, is what is the most urgent need as far as storytelling when it comes to zoos, aquariums, and I'll include botanic gardens as well, having a similar space in society. What's that communication that's needed around preventing future extinctions? And Fiona, maybe I'll start with you real quick for your thoughts on that.
It's a great question. Thank you very much. I think, for example, through Extinct in the Wild is a real opportunity for zoos to live their mission, and aquariums and botanical gardens. And the story is quite linear and it's quite easy for people to understand, but somehow we still see time and time again in many, many zoos and aquariums and botanical gardens, our Extinct in the Wild species being exhibited, but us not being proud of that story and not being proud to tell that story. And we need to find a way to make these animals and plants exciting and interesting, and they all have something unique about them. They all have a story to tell, and we need to unlock those stories to be able to tell our public and to make it engaging and make it a bit silly. And I bring back this little Partula Stuffy here. We need to do more of that, because if our people don't love these animals and don't connect with them, then we can't be eliciting the required behavior change.
Carly, do you have any thoughts from the botanic garden side?
I could say what Fiona said, but I don't have a fluffy tree to hold up or a cactus or something. Which maybe we should. Yeah, there we go. Loving that snail. I totally agree. It also goes back to what Sam said earlier. We need to have the stories. We need to look at selecting our species for impact. What impact will our actions have on that species, rather than the prestige? Oh, I worked on something big and charismatic, but you could have much more impact on a species and its associated species by working on something small like a snail or a small fungi that can restore a whole forest. But we need those stories, and we need to know how they link back to people. We are all people, so we need to have those linkages back, those stories. And we do that in the Botanic Garden Network. We are working with zoos and aquaria. We are here, and Reverse the Red is bringing us together to bring our stories together of our successes. It goes back to the beginning of the webinar when we were talking about recovering extinct in the wild species, and Fiona was saying it, you've got to go through a lot of steps, but if we can share our experiences, and maybe my experience on recovering a heather or an erica is similar to a bird species, and there are similarities, and we share those, we can have greater impact. So in our community of scientists, conservationists, we need to network and share stories, and wider.
Absolutely. And I think I'll just to add to it, building on a few things you said there, Carly, the one thing we often look at with Reverse the Red is back to that idea of impact. So many of our storytelling initiatives, which we're the ones that dictate the stories we tell, but we often tell stories in fairly vague, kind of emotionally driven ways, because that seems to have worked in the past. But I think as things are changing in conservation, particularly if we want to start unlocking major funding and this alignment with governments, it can't just be the emotional story. It has to be driven on impact. But that's actually where there's so much alignment between so many of these initiatives, like both the Action Partnerships and the Illegal Plant Coalition, things like WASA and regional association conservation initiatives, which we see in Germany, we see in North America and the US. They're actually very complementary. When we understand the commitment with the measurable impact, now we can really start cooking. This is the thing we need. And what we find is that when you communicate that measurable change, people get it. When you can say we've moved it from extinct in the wild back into the wild, that's clear. When we've moved it from critically endangered to endangered, that's clear. The end result and the impact is clear, even if the science is messy, right? We can leave that to the scientists, but to the broad public, they understand those things and they're excited about it, and they want to hear success, not just that it's all falling apart. So there's a balance there. And maybe the last thing, we're at time, so this might be a 30-second response for everybody. but is there an ambitious goal that you feel worth pursuing for 2026 for each of your elements in the different things that you've talked about? So 30-second version or less. Sam, I'll ask you to go first. What's an ambitious goal that you've got in mind for this year?
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, I would like to see better coordination and more of these national species specialist groups coming together and providing inputs into national biodiversity strategy and planning. So that's something I would like to see more of.
Love it. Okay, Fiona?
I'd like to see us peer-to-peer sharing and introducing our conspecifics to our donor networks so that we can drive better work, better species recovery, and be even more collaborative and more sharing in this space. And I'd like to see from our donors flexible funding that really works to meet our needs.
Love it. Carly, and then Lois last.
More transparency in sharing our data and our experiences. And I think Fiona stole my one with seeing funders being a bit more flexible in what the species need for recovery, and dictating that in projects.
Love it. Okay. Lois.
I'd like for us to move from commitment to delivery. And I think that's what I can say.
Fantastic. Okay. And I'll put my ambitious goal out there is I'd love to see us have 15,000 species pledges and commitments to action towards recovery. We're well on the way, but that's the ambitious goal for me. So again, to all of you as panelists, thank you genuinely from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor to work with each and every one of you. We need all of us moving in the same direction. And for all of those who are listening in, again, it takes all of us. And so thank you for your role, what you do, and your commitment for species. Again, if you are sharing any stories this week or on February 7th for Reverse the Red Day, tag us, include us, we'll help amplify that. There is no shortage of hope that we need in this world that this is possible, but we do know that it is. So thank you again for everything. Reach out if you ever need anything from us from Reverse the Red. And yeah, go about doing good in the world this week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.